Back when I got started doing surveillance way back in 2008, there was not near the technology available out there as there is today. I was constantly looking for and inventing new ways to improve my surveillance game. One of the toughest obstacles to overcome was being able to watch a residence when there was no logical place for me to park my car without my subject and the entire neighborhood seeing me and my vehicle. Obviously, I can black out and I can hide inside my vehicle to not be seen. And when I say black out, I mean I use black foam core cutouts that fit into the windows in my surveillance car, a black curtain behind me, and a sunscreen in the windshield in front of me to basically put me into a black box so nobody can see inside the car. With my blackouts, if anybody tries to look into the vehicle, it just looks like I have really, really dark tinted windows on the vehicle. Man, this is very nice. However, there are times when that is simply not enough. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. This case was set up in a small rural town way out in the boonies, a long ways from anywhere. Now, my subject was the ex-wife of my client. She had moved back to Colorado after they separated, and she had brought all 3 of her kids with her. Of those 3 kids, only one was my client's child, but he was worried for all 3 of the kids' well-being. He was especially worried about his child, who was the baby. She was the littlest one of the 3. His little girl was about 3 years old, and he was worried that his ex-wife was just dropping her off at her parents' house for long stretches of time. And when I say long stretches of time, I mean like days on end, for many days at a time. He was also worried because he also knew that both her mom and her dad drank a lot and was not sure that this was a safe environment for any of the kids to be at for long periods of time. The other kids were older, and he knew that she would leave them home sometimes alone when she went out and did her thing, as he called it. He knew that she had a tendency to go out partying from time to time, and sometimes that might be 3 or 4 or 5 days. Okay, I was doing my homework, studying the neighborhoods, gathering as much information as I could, and I discovered that her family seemed to own many of the houses on the block where her parents lived. I mean, her sister lived right next door, her grandma was down the street, and a couple of uncles and aunts were just a few doors down. Now, when I first went out, I just conducted surveillance at my subject's residence. She lived in the same little town, but in a different area, so I wasn't too worried. It seemed to be just routine surveillance at first, but I found myself often following her over to her parents' house, where she would drop off my client's daughter, sometimes with the other kids and sometimes by herself. Day 3 into the case, she goes over about 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and she drops off the kids, and she is all dolled up, dressed to the nines, and obviously going out for the night. Now, the case was not as much about her, but about the child. The client's attorney wanted me to get as much information about where the child was and who was around her and what activity she was exposed to, rather than what his ex-wife was doing with her free time. Given all of that, I stay where the kid is and I let her go on her merry way. I figured she will be back eventually, right? I called in a backup PI who I had already informed about the situation, and he came in to relieve me, and he worked the night shift. I get up bright and early in the morning and I check in with the other PI to see how things are going. Oh my, not so well, he says. About half the neighborhood knows that he's there. I'm like, were you hidden? He says, yep. I'm like, were you blacked out? He says, yep. Okay, what to do now? Well, I had him wait until an opportune time, and then he pulled an old trick that just sometimes works for situations like this. When nobody was around, he just opens up the door in his car, and he closes it, and then he opens it and closes it a couple times, makes it sound like people just got in the car. Then he starts it up, and he heads out like nothing ever happened. He did see one person look out a window when he closed his door, but then stopped looking as he drove off. Disaster averted, for the meantime anyway. However, my backup PI's car was now compromised, so he was effectively out of the game. I needed to come up with a way to make sure that I could get as much video as I could and keep my eyes on that house quickly without blowing the entire surveillance. I finished that day out just watching from outside the neighborhood to make sure the subject never came back, and following any known vehicles associated with her parents to see if the kids were inside the car. It was a long day, to be sure. I had another backup PI come in and pull another overnighter for me, watching for the subject. I get up bright and early about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I check in with my overnight guy. All is good. He has not seen the subject, and he did see the little girl inside the parents' house during a walk by about about 8 o'clock the night before, so we are still good. Now, I had and I still have a JVC AVC HD camera, just like this one with Wi-Fi capability. This little camera is amazing. I can connect to it with an app, and I can start and stop recording. I can take photos, I can zoom in and I can zoom out, which is truly amazing. However, that was not going to help me a lot in this particular case. But there's another feature this camera has. I can actually set it up to connect to a router or a hotspot and then remote into the camera from the app on another phone. This little feature has saved me many times, folks. Now, I had a little hotspot that I connected the camera to. Then I went to the neighborhood early in the morning and I set up the camera and the hotspot. I had them plugged into one of those battery packs that you use for jump starting your car with a DC to AC converter, so they stayed charged the entire time. Then I set the camera up in the back seat of the vehicle on a tripod pointing right out the front window. I had black curtains up just so the camera lens was just sticking out. Plus I had my blackouts in the side window, so it was completely dark inside the car, so nobody could see anything except an unoccupied car. I then walked about a half a mile away to a fast food joint. There were several of these in close proximity to each other, so I just stayed at one for an hour or so, then I went to the next one for an hour or so, and I kept doing that. I was able to sit there with my phone and watch the entire day, record everything that happened, and believe me, there was plenty of things that had occurred, and we got all of the evidence that we needed. I did this for 2 days with a backup coming in and covering the neighborhood at the night for me, so I can go home and get a little rest, recharge everything, including my own batteries. I got the case extended, and we did this again a few weeks later when she went out for another 3 or 4 day party spree. Needless to say, the client was ecstatic. Custody was altered to his benefit, and I still use that camera from time to time for those types of situations.